Welcome to Session 2 of Music 239, Intro to World Music. Last time when we left off, we were studying about the general principles of world music. And just to review those just briefly, we talked about how music cultures are dynamic rather than static. And they rarely ever die off, means that they simply become combined with whatever the more modern type of music is. Music as a controlling force, particularly in religious and political reasons. And we will see this in many examples from different cultures about how music is used to control how people think and how they act. Ethnocentrism, generally not a good thing. My type of music is better than your type of music. That kind of thought is generally something that is best left behind when we're studying music of world cultures. Now let's move on to talk about scale forms that are extremely important for this course. And the most important one is the pentatonic scale. Okay? Pentatonic gets its name from the fact that there are 5 notes in the scale. The other one we're going to look at next is the 12-tone chromatic scale. And that's the one that you would get if you played all of the notes on the piano, one after another. This slide, called Useful Scales, delineates both of those scales and how they work. Okay? For those of you that are in music theory classes, you'll find this to be the pentatonic scale mode 2. But for the world music class, that's really not that important of information. What it is important to know is that the pentatonic scale is made up of nothing but major seconds and minor third intervals. Okay? Now, I know that many of you don't know what a major second and a minor third is, and that's okay, because the number of half steps on the 12-tone chromatic scale here can be seen in the count in parentheses up above. So for example, to get from the C to the D, the first note to the second note in the pentatonic scale, we count 2 half steps in the chromatic scale. And so those half steps are in parentheses as we go through. Now, this kind of detail of information in terms of reading music is not going to be something you're going to be responsible for on the test. I just put it here for your information, particularly for those in the class that are music majors. If you're not a music major, don't panic at this moment, because this is not something that you're going to be tested on. This isn't a music theory class. But from time to time, you'll find that I will put things in greater theoretical detail up here to benefit the music majors, but it's not something that you'll be held accountable for on the test. What you need to know about the pentatonic scale is that it is a 5-tone scale, okay, and that there is a fairly consistent interval content made up of the major second interval and the minor third interval as we go through. We're going to see many and many pentatonic scales as we go through this course. And so I'm wanting to introduce it here at the very beginning so that you'll be aware of what it is, and every time I refer to it, then you'll have a reference point. Also, note how the spelling is. I don't know how many times I've seen students write pentatonic without the T. So pentatonic, okay? Penta meaning 5. Now, Chapter 11 gives you a series of organizing principles, 8 of them, that are extremely important for this class. And even though it's the last chapter in the book, I'm presenting it first here because you can use these organizing principles, and I hope you will, to organize your papers for your final project. So for example, if you were writing a final project about the bagpipes and you were going to interview this person, then you would want to take each one of these 8 principles and apply it to this particular player and to the instrument in general. As you look through your text, you will find the general descriptions of how all of these things work. So if you can turn in your text to chapter 11, those of you that have books with you today, you'll see all of these categories outlined as you go through the chapter. Family, generation and gender, leisure, religion, ethnicity, regionalism, nationalism, and commercial music. And there's a paragraph in your text about each one of these and how they apply to the music that is being studied. Now, not all of these categories may apply to what you're studying. For example, if you're studying the ancient playing of the bagpipes in Ireland, for example, and you're studying these very ancient chants, commercial music may not have an effect on that. So you may leave that category out. But in general, each of these categories will help you to create paragraphs or even whole subject areas in your papers as you begin to organize it. And so I would really urge you to be aware of these principles and to apply them as you start to think about what your final project is going to be. Now, chapter 11 really could be called How to Become an Amateur Ethnomusicologist, because that's what they're trying to train you to do, and that's what you will be doing as you approach your final project for this course. The most important and first step is gaining entry. Okay, let's say you find a music culture that you want to study. You want to study blues bands, the particular blues band that plays down at the Outland downtown on Friday nights, okay? And you're going to study this particular band. Well, the first thing to do is to gain entry to that music culture. You know somebody in the band, friend of a friend, whatever. Get yourself invited, meet the members of the group, gain entry to the music culture in some way or another. Second, library and internet research. Know before you go. Know something about the music culture before you go in and start talking to them. Okay? If you don't know anything about blues, if you've never heard blues before, and you go and you start talking to members of the band, you're liable to sound fairly ignorant about it. Okay? Know something about it before you go into that culture and learn something and start to talk to the members of that music culture. Participation and observation. Obviously, you're going to observe what they're doing, but if possible, see if you can participate. If you happen to play the bass and you can get yourself invited to sit in with the blues band, even better, because then you are participating in the culture in some way. This can apply to any culture that you study. Ethics, very, very important. Gain permission to do what you are doing. Be very upfront with them from the very beginning about the fact that you are taking a class and you want to study their music, and that then after you've studied your music, you're going to be writing a paper about it. And if you, particularly if you have the opportunity to record something that they've done, tell them that you're going to record it, tell them what it's going to be for, get permission. Some groups, particularly rock bands that are under contract with a record deal or something, may not want you recording their stuff because they might be afraid of bootlegs. So you need to respect that. Be aware of the fact that there are certain restrictions that they might have. You need to be honest and upfront with them from the very beginning about what you're doing and what it's for. Okay, ethics. Field gear. What might you need to take with you in order to document this music culture? Certainly, if you are going to be doing something that involves a recording, okay, then bringing a recording device of some sort would be a great idea. There's some great portable DAT recorders out there. Some of you all have these portable MP3 recorders. I'm really jealous of you. I'm going to get one of those real soon. Those are terrific because some of them are about the size of a little USB drive, and you can take it with you and record things. That's great if you want recording to be part of your ethnography. Certainly a camera of some sort, digital camera is great. Okay, even just a little disposable camera would be a great idea to take with you, to take some pictures of whatever the music culture that you're studying is. So having that kind of equipment, field gear with you is important. Your text, as you read it, you will discover some examples of what not to do when you're interviewing people about what they do. And by the way, some of these interviews could take place over the internet on email. If you are able to get in touch with a great harmonica player and you want to study the harmonica and you can do an online interview via email, those are perfectly acceptable. But be aware that asking open-ended questions and not leading questions would be very important. And you'll see some examples in your text of how to do that. You don't want to ask questions that are going to result in yes or no answers. You want to ask the kinds of questions that are going to result in longer answers so that they're doing the talking instead of you in the interview. Sharing the information is also very important. Obviously, for this class, you're going to be writing a paper about it. And so sharing the information in some way is part of the whole process. So those are the issues that you need to consider as you approach your project and as you become amateur ethnomusicologists. Now, I talked earlier about an assignment due next time, and that is to write a one-paragraph project proposal. All the work you should turn in this course should be typed, and it needs to be with descriptions of organizing principles to be used. So as many of the 8 principles that we had 2 slides ago, go back and look at that. Okay, those 8 principles, in your paragraph that you turn in to me next time, please include as many of those principles as possible in terms of the ones that you will be able to use for the project that you're going to approach. Just a paragraph, not even a page long. Okay? Also, for next time, begin reading Chapter 2. We're going to actually start Native American music just in a few minutes here, and I realize that many of you have probably not read that chapter yet, so we'll proceed with that knowledge. But by the time we meet next time, you need to have read Chapter 2 on Native American music so that you are up to speed on that whole thing. Okay, before I proceed, are there any questions on the information that we've looked at so far particularly regarding your final projects, the 8 principles, any of that information? Yes?
For your paragraph or project proposal, if you change your mind later on, is that okay? This is just what
Yes.
you plan on doing?
Yes, good question. You can change your mind later on. Right now I'm looking for a preliminary project proposal, but if you all of a sudden decide, oh wow, I've just met this great bagpipe player and I'd like to do something on him, and you discover that next week, certainly you can change. Yeah, you're not locked in. Good question. Other questions? Right. Then let's proceed with our next unit. And I'm going to have to do a little finagling here at the computer for a minute. While we do, though, let's listen to just a little bit of Native American music. This This is track 3 on your CD. It is the Sioux grass dance. Not something you hear every day, that Sioux grass dance music. The picture you have up here is one that you will become familiar with in the next class, because we are going to actually make a water drum. So the picture you see up there is the actual water drum that we're going to make, made out of a ceramic pot and and then some other materials, including the rawhide tie that goes around it, and then it's basically just a sheepskin chamois that's over the top. You know, you can buy it at an auto parts store. So out of that, you can make a pretty convincing-looking Native American water drum, and we're going to do that in our next class session. So the music contexts that we're going to be looking at involving Native American music have to do with religion, okay, a variety of different religions that tie themselves to the music in the Native American cultures that we'll study, social dances, games, calendar rituals, and events in the life cycle. Okay, all of these have to do with the culture of Native American music. A lot of supernatural elements. Music is used in many cases as a form of prayer, depending on the religion that is involved. And there are dreams, visitations, okay, all sorts of supernatural kinds of things having to do with the music we'll study. Music and dance, very, very important. Music is used to accompany dance, and the two are inexorably intertwined. Now, general characteristics, and I'll try to do this with each of the cultures that we study, is to give you a list of characteristics of this music to listen for. And then as you begin to hear the music on the CDs, you can go down this list and say, well, do I hear singing in octaves? Do I hear monophonic texture? What is a monophonic texture? Single melody, sung by either one person or by everybody together, right? That was one of those 4 textures that we talked about, those 4 harmonic textures that we looked at in our last section. So you might review your notes on that. Yeah, monophonic, singing in octaves. What does that mean? Yes?
2 people are singing the same note, but they're in different registers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. They're singing an octave apart. And that typically happens when you have men and boys singing, or when you have men and women singing. The women will be an octave higher than the men. So that's a typical thing that you will find when that sort of arrangement is going on. Vocables. A vocable is basically a nonsense syllable. Now, I say nonsense because that's how we understand it in our culture. When we sing fa-la-la-la-la, we are singing syllables that are not necessarily meaningful in the language. But just because I say nonsense doesn't mean that it is meaningless in the culture in which we're studying it. And the Native American culture, the syllables might not be nonsense. Even though they are not actual words in the culture, they might have a meaning to the listener and to the performer, such as in the Navajo Yebeche chant, for example, where the vocables that happen at the beginning are cries to the gods. Okay, so it's a misnomer, I think, to call it nonsense. I use that term only because it's one that occurs in our culture when we think of terms like fa la 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 la, that kind of sound. So be aware of that distinction. Repetition, okay, things that repeat quite often happen a lot in Native American music. You'll find that a lot. You'll find falsetto. So male singers in particular have to sing falsetto in order to sing higher notes. So as I sing like this, ah, and then I went up to that real high note, I had to go into what is known as head voice instead of chest voice to get that higher note. That's what's known as falsetto. And if you go back and listen to the Sioux grass dance that we just heard, you'll hear the male singers singing falsetto at the very beginning. And listen to it again. Listen to it again. That's falsetto. They start very high and then they end up coming down into the chest voice a little bit later. Falsetto is a very common aspect of Native American music. Pulsations on long notes. Pulsations on long notes, okay? As you continue to listen to Native American music, you'll hear that happen. When they hold a note, they tend to create pulses on it. Track number 5 on your CD has an example of that.
Kono hono swig yo di zo di nyako kono hono swig yo di zo di nyako we go hono hi o we go hono hi o we go no hi o kono hono.
When the singer holds long notes, he has these little pulsations that makes it sound like he's singing a different text syllable at that point, but he's not. And as you listen to it with the book, you'll see how that works. Our old friend, the pentatonic scale. Here it is, the very first time. We see a lot of pentatonic music in Native American music. Also, within that, descending small note collections, 1 or 2 notes that start high and go lower. See that descending small note collections a lot. Accompaniment by percussion instruments, rattles and drums, happens frequently in this music. And when it does, percussion and vocals are not necessarily connected. If you look at track 10 on CD number 1, the Hymn of the Native American Church, listen to the vocals and then listen to the rattle and the drum. The rattle and the drum are together, but they are not in the same tempo with the vocals. So in this case, the percussion instruments and the vocals are not in the same tempo. They're not trying to stay together. Very interesting point. We're going to perform that piece in class next time, so be ready. Somebody's going to need to play that drum. We may not take it quite that fast, though. Okay, so these elements, these general considerations are very important. Now, what I want to do is an exercise here. Let's listen to a bit of the Sioux Grass Dance, which is track number 3, the Zuni Lullaby, track number 4, and the Gadasjøt Quiver Dance, which is number 5. Let's listen to some short excerpts from all 3 of those and see how many of the general characteristics that I just mentioned we can hear in these 3 pieces of music. Okay, so we're going to start with the Sioux Grass Dance, track 3, CD 1. just what we've heard. Do we have monophonic music? Is there a single melody being sung by all the singers?
It sounds like there's two different ones. One's a little bit higher.
Okay, there's two different melodies going on. Kind of hard to hear. Okay. Might they be singing in octaves? Yeah. There's two octaves going on, and sometimes they're not entirely together, but I think they're intended to be. If they weren't together, what kind of texture could you call it? Remember when yes, heterophonic. When the same melody is sung with different interpretations at the same time, you might call that heterophonic, but I think that in general it's designed to be monophonic. An interesting kind of divergence there as a possibility. So we have monophonic, we might have heterophonic, depending on how you interpret it. We have singing in octaves. Do we have vocables? Well, you don't know that yet, do you? You don't know that until you look at the book and see the transcription of this in the text. But you will find, yes, indeed, what we're listening to are vocables here. These are not actual words. The textbook is very helpful because it has the translations of all of the text. It has the text to all of these songs printed out. So I urge you, as you start working with this, to use the book and the music at the same time. To look at the words that are going on, because that's the only way you will know that indeed you do have vocables in this song. Repetition?
Yes.
Absolutely. We heard the same phrase being repeated quite a bit, didn't we? Mm-hmm. Falsetto? Yeah, we already talked about that. Sure, they start with falsetto in the head voice, and then the singers move down into chest voice after that. Mm-hmm. Pulsations on long notes. Anybody hear that?
Lots of it.
Did you? Okay. This piece doesn't have quite as many long notes as the next example that we're going to hear, but if you heard that, if you listened to it, you might be able to identify some of that going on here. Mm-hmm. What about pentatonic scale? Go back and listen to it again. You'd have to determine, well, gee, is that the kind of scale that's being used? And the fact is that if you were to identify the tones, pretty hard to sing along, particularly if you're a guy, with that part right there. But then as it goes down into the lower chest voice, you might find that you could sing along and match pitches a little bit better. In your book, in Chapter 2, you will find some transcriptions of some of this music. Okay? If you look at Chapter 2, you find that the writer of the chapter has done some musical transcriptions, and as you work through this, you will find some that indeed there are some pentatonic elements. This is something that we will be studying in class, so I'm not necessarily expecting you to hear that one just from listening to it for a short element like that. Descending small note collections. Hear how it descends. Small number of notes. Okay, very characteristic of Native American music, and so yes, we have that category here. Accompanied by percussion instruments. Sure. Yeah, we got drums. What else do we have going on? I think there may be some rattles, bells. Okay. Are they staying together? Yes. In this case, the percussion and the vocals are staying together in synchronization. So in that case, we don't really fulfill that last category. But it looks to me like we got just about every one of those covered with that Sioux grass dance. Okay, so being able to go through and take these categories and apply them to the music and ultimately remember which ones did what are part of what we'll be doing in this class. Let's move on to the next one, the Zuni Lullaby. See how many of them we can apply here.
Boketana, akteki, oksiktana, kochitana, atuktana, akteki, boketana, oksiktana, akteki, boketana, oksiktana, kochitana,
Try to find the transcription of this piece in your book. It's in chapter 2. Okay, anybody have it? Mm-hmm. Okay. You'll find a transcription of it musically. You'll also find a translation of what this means. Okay, it's a lullaby. Now, go back and look at the music that we just heard from the Sioux grass dance, which happens on the previous pages, and tell me the difference between these two pieces of music. What's the purpose of these pieces of music? Anybody know? Yeah. Uh-huh. Uses only 2 or 3 syllables. Right. But what is the purpose of the Sioux grass dance? Can you gather that just by looking at the text? And in fact, it is a war dance. So completely different cultural contexts, and understanding the context of the music is extremely paramount in this case. Now, so clearly there are contrasts between this music because of what it's being used for. But how many of these categories do both pieces fulfill? Is the second piece monophonic? Absolutely. It's a single singer, so by definition it falls into that category. Singing in octaves? No, not in this case, because there's only one singer, so we got to have at least 2 singers to sing in octaves. Vocables? As you look through and you see what is being sung, okay, in your text, and look at the translation, you'll discover that there are no vocables in this song, whereas the first song did have vocables. This one does not. Repetition? Yes. Okay. Falsetto doesn't apply really because it's a female singer in this case. Pulsations on long notes? Absolutely. Did you all hear that? When she was holding longer notes, her voice is pulsing. Okay, those pulsations on long notes, characteristic of both pieces. Pentatonic scale, you could certainly fit the small number of notes that are being sung in this piece into a pentatonic scale. Yeah, absolutely. Descending small note collections, yes, same principle. Mm-hmm. Accompanied by percussion, in this case, no, so that doesn't apply. But I think we came up with 4 or 5 different categories that applied to both pieces of music, even though they have completely different cultural contexts and their purpose for existing is diametrically opposed. Still, the characteristics of the music fit both. And that's the kind of way that I want you to go about studying this music. Let's listen to the last example that I have here in the PowerPoint. And actually, let me show you that slide where I'm asking you to compare and contrast, and that's what we're doing here in comparing and contrasting these 3 pieces of music. This is an Iroquois quiver dance song called Gadasjøt. It's CD number 1, track 5. Let's see how many of the characteristics we can apply to this piece.
Kono hono swig, yo di zo di nyako. Kono hono swig, di zo di nyako. We go hono hi o. We go hono hi o. We go no hi o. Kono hono swig, di zo di nyako. Kono hono swig, di zo di nyako. We go hono hi o. We go hono hi o.
Everybody find the translation, the transcription, and also the translation of this piece? Just go on a couple more pages, and if you look in the sidebar where it says CD 1.5, you can always find the description of the piece pretty close to where the CD description is. Okay, so move ahead and look for that. This piece is about what? What topic? It's about going out and finding women, right? That's what this song's about. So these guys are looking to find women, and here's a great place to find them. That's basically what it says. So we have yet a third, completely different context than the first two songs that we've heard. How many of the elements can we identify here? Is there monophonic singing? No? What do we have instead? Polyphonic? Well, polyphonic implies that different melodies are going on at the same time. And to some extent that might be happening. You could argue polyphonic music. What we have here is something that we're going to run into a lot more when we study African music, and it is called call and response. Call and response. And what you might do is to add that to your list of characteristics, even though it's not one of the ones that's listed on the PowerPoint presentation. Call and response, you don't see it as much in Native American music. This is a fairly rare occurrence, but we're going to run into it a lot when we start studying African music, so it's good to be knowing about it a little earlier. But what Will has pointed out is that we have a solo singer that's singing, and then he continues to sing while the other singers come in. So you could argue that we have a sort of a polyphonic texture here, right? To some extent, it's still monophonic, though, because in both cases, they're all just singing a single melodic line. It happens that they tend to overlap a little bit, and so you could argue monophonic, you could argue polyphonic. I think you could be successful with either argument in this case. But the call and response is something to remember for the future. What about singing in octaves? Do we have any of that? Not really in this case. Not as much singing in octaves, certainly not as much as we had in the first example. Okay. Vocables, do we have any of those? Yes, where do we have vocables in this piece? The responses, right. And actually, I think it's probably a group of singers, that do the response here. And they sing the vocables that you see listed to the right, in the right column of the text there. So the solo singer is singing text that is about the women in Oswego, and the responders are singing vocables. Okay, good. Repetition? You bet. Yeah, every time the responders come in, they sing the same thing. And the phrases, the short phrases that the solo singer is singing get repeated pretty frequently as well. Any falsetto singing in here? No, not in this case. No falsetto singing in this example. Pulsations on long notes? Shall we hear it again?
Gonna hana swig, yo, the Zodi Yako, gonna hana swig, the Zodi Yako, we go hana he, we go hana he, we go no he.
Anybody detect any pulsations there? Perhaps so. I think that one's sort of a close call. I think that when the solo singer is holding out on a sweegan, right, he's holding out that last syllable, I think there are some pulsations there in the solo singer. They're pretty hard to catch. I would probably give you credit either way on that one, but it's certainly something to listen for. Pentatonic scale, yes. You could pretty much guess pentatonic scale on just about every one of these and get it right, okay? Descending small note collections, you bet, there they are again. Every piece we've heard so far has had that descending small note collection category covered. Accompanied by percussion instruments. Any percussion here? No, not in this case. So the last two categories do not apply. But I think you're finding a pattern of elements that are consistent within all three of these pieces of music that are not necessarily connected in any kind of other way. They're from different cultures. They have completely different reasons for existing, and yet we have some of these same categories existing with all three. So when you are asked on a test, for example, to compare and contrast, these are the kinds of things that you should use in order to do that. And you can use these characteristics, and you can also use the cultural context in which the music was written. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about some general principles of Native American music, and in particular the instruments that are used in these cultures. And breaking it down into the four categories of instruments that we looked at earlier in the last class session, the idiophones existing here are rattles, stick instruments, log drums, okay? Anything that creates a sound through a vibration without a string or a membrane. So a rattle would fall into the idiophone category, as well as stick instruments, drums, etc. Membranophones, okay, all of the single-headed or double-headed drums, kettledrums, sometimes filled with water. We're going to look at the water drum in our next class session. That is certainly a membranophone. Chordophones, okay, almost non-existent in this culture. In all of the Native American cultures, there are some rare examples of one-string or two-string fiddles, but not very much. Not very much. And finally, the aerophone. Okay, flutes made of wood, cane, sometimes pottery. Very, very common in this culture. So aerophones are something that you can expect to see quite a bit of. Okay, questions so far on Native American music? Okay. We're going to go on and look a little bit at Navajo music, because you'll find that this textbook tends to look in general at the culture of a particular style of music, and then it goes into specific detail on one particular aspect of the culture. And in this case, it's going to focus on one tribe, the Navajo, and music traditions associated with that tribe. So you'll find that your text goes into a great deal of detail on the Navajo way of life, on their culture, and there's some great information on that in the book that I would like you to spend some time reading over this next time. We'll get into Navajo music a lot more during our next class session, but today we're going to just look at some of their cultural elements and ways of life. So moving on to the next PowerPoint slide, we can see a map here, and you have an example of this in your text as well, of where the Navajo reservation is located. You can see that it's generally in Arizona, portions of it, though, in New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. Carves out a large section of those states, which is the current Navajo reservation. Now, if you looked at the map of the United States and looked at where Native American tribes are located, you would find large numbers of them in the Southwest, okay, large numbers throughout all regions of the Northeast and the Midwest, and hardly any in the southeastern states. Just small pockets down in southern Florida, where the Miccosukee Seminole live, in western North Carolina, where the Cherokee have a number of reservations, okay? But throughout all the other areas of the southwestern United States, you will not find Native American tribes. Anybody know why this is? President Andrew Jackson basically decided that he didn't want the Native Americans anywhere in the southeast, and they were forced to uproot and move west, and that's when a lot of them moved to Oklahoma. Particularly the Cherokee Nation moved at that time. There were some tribes who resisted and stayed put, and they were the only ones that are left. And those are the Miccosukee Seminole and the Cherokee of western North Carolina, the only ones who didn't move. Everybody else moved, and so there are no Native American tribes in much of the southeastern United States as a result. A very sad and tragic chapter of our nation's history was the uprooting of all of these Native American tribes. And you'll find that it has a major effect on their culture and on ours in those places. So the majority of the tribes that are still producing music and creating the culture of Native Americans then are in the Southwest and in the Northeast, places like the Navajo Reservation that you see on your PowerPoint. Okay, so continuing then to talk about the Navajo, and you'll find a good deal of this information in your text about the culture. The Navajo is the largest tribe still existing in the United States. Okay, and you see the places where they have the reservations. Large economic impact on the region. They do a lot of work with uranium, coal, natural gas, okay? All of the things that are here in the book and on the PowerPoint, they are a major force in that region in terms of economics. As we will discover during our next session, they also have a major influence on the arts and particularly on music. So when we convene again, we will dig deeper into Navajo culture. In preparation for that, I urge you to go ahead and listen to all of the CD tracks having to do with the Native American music and specifically the Navajo. Read over Chapter 2 very carefully. And of course, there is the assignment that is due next time, the one-paragraph description of your final projects. We'll see you next time.